The Romans had first set foot upon the Isle of Britannia with Caesar's expeditions in 55 and 54 BC. Yet it would be almost a century before Emperor Claudius launched a proper invasion to conquer southern England and Wales. The Britons would resist them staunchly over the years with raids, pitched battles, and full-scale revolts. Ultimately, however, they would find themselves crushed by the weight of the inexorable legions. Unsated by this conquest, the Romans now sought new foes in yet uncharted regions, pushing the bounds of the empire to its most northern extent in history. Today, let us bring to life Agricola's famous invasion of ancient Scotland. I love working on these documentaries, but the grind often makes it hard to strike a proper work-life balance. That often means finding ways to be more efficient, but I hate it when it comes at the cost of my wallet or my health. Today's sponsor, Factor, makes this easy by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right at your doorstep. They offer a wealth of options which can be tuned to specific meal preferences such as keto, vegetarian, calorie smart, and more, with over 34 options available each week featuring premium ingredients like truffle butter, leeks, and asparagus. You can also pick from over 45 add-ons like smoothies, shakes, snacks, and desserts. Simply pick the ones you want, receive your delivery box, check out the goods, and pop your selection in the microwave for a great chef-quality dish that's ready in 2 minutes or less. From personal experience living off takeout and grocery store pre-mades, I can definitely recommend Factor as a more healthy, affordable, and time-saving alternative for a fast-paced schedule. What's more, is Factor also makes this a sustainable choice with their renewable energy-powered facilities and 100% delivery emission offsets. So head to factor75.com or click the link below and use the code Invicta50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Enjoy! For context, it is worth briefly summarizing the political landscape of ancient Britain. Celtic culture had arrived in Britain around the 2nd millennium BC and gradually spread to become the dominant culture across what is now England, Wales, and Scotland. The Britons were divided into several tribes, such as the Iceni and Brigantes, who regularly competed with one another for supremacy over the span of centuries. By the time our story takes place, the Romans had been fighting in Britain for 4 decades. The famous Roman conquest of Britain began in 43 AD under the Emperor Claudius, who ordered a campaign against hostile tribes in the south under the pretext of protecting Rome's allies and trade interests in the region. Over the following years, the Romans steadily ground their way through any tribe that opposed them, creating the province of Britannia. However, they faced stern resistance across their many campaigns, and in 60 AD, all of their efforts came under serious threat when a large uprising broke out, led by Boudicca, queen of the Iceni. The Briton rebels caused significant damage throughout the province, razing its 3 key settlements to the ground, but were quickly and bloodily brought to heel by the Roman general Suetonius Paulinus. Nevertheless, Boudicca's rebellion had caused considerable damage across Roman Britain, and it would take time to rebuild. Meanwhile, the empire continued to face resistance from unconquered tribes to the north. Nevertheless, a succession of governors were able to continue Roman expansion and consolidate what gains had been made over the years, while also continuing the steady process of Romanization in the province. However, in 77 AD, these efforts were about to be redoubled by a new, more energetic general. Britain's new governor was Gnaeus Julius Agricola, a man who had already made a name for himself in the province long before his appointment. Agricola hailed from a politically well-connected family of senatorial background, with both his mother and father's side having a distinguished history. He is traditionally said to have been born in the old Roman colony of Forum Julii in Gaul in 40 AD. However, some more recent scholarship has argued that he was actually born in Rome itself. Nevertheless, it is clear that Agricola's formative years, at least, were spent in Gaul, though we unfortunately know very little about this early stage of his life. According to the Roman historian Tacitus, who notably was also his son-in-law, Agricola showed an early interest in philosophy while studying in Massilia, reportedly pursuing it with such enthusiasm that his mother felt it necessary to restrain his studies out of fear it would impede the rest of his career. Agricola formally began his career in public life in 58 AD at the age of 18 by following the traditional Roman path of serving as a military tribune. He was appointed to one of the 4 legions stationed in Britain and served under the famous governor Suetonius Paulinus. He thus likely saw action during the Roman assault on the island of Mona in 60 AD, where Paulinus defeated the ancient Druids. However, news of the uprising of Boudicca forced the Romans to divert their forces back to the south before they could properly consolidate their gains, allowing Mona to eventually fall back into the hands of the Britons. Agricola would have then been present at the final battle against Boudicca, which saw her rebellion crushed, as well as during Paulinus' brutal reprisals against the Britons who had backed the insurgency. Agricola returned to Rome in 62 AD, continuing his political career and also marrying his wife, Domitia Decadiana. He then served as quaestor in the province of Asia in 64 AD, a tribune of the plebs in Rome in 66 AD, and finally a praetor in 68 AD. Agricola was then swept up into the tumultuous Year of the 4 Emperors in 69 AD, which saw a succession of Roman generals compete for control of the imperial purple following the death of Nero, during which his mother was tragically killed by Roman sailors loyal to the usurper Otho. Agricola decided to back the general Vespasian in his bid for the throne, a choice which proved to be well timed, as Vespasian's forces were able to secure Rome for him by the end of the year. Perhaps as a reward for this show of loyalty, Vespasian supported Agricola's political and military advancement by appointing him as the legate of the 10th Legion Valeria Victrix around 70 AD, which saw Agricola return to Britain, where his career had begun. Agricola served with distinction there, reimposing discipline on his legion, which had grown lax over the past months of civil war and a recent mutiny, and then leading it on campaigns against hostile tribes to the north alongside the governor Quintus Batilius Cerialis. Agricola remained in Britain until 73 AD, when he returned to Rome and was made governor of Gallia Aquitania. 3 years later, he was recalled to Rome and made a suffect consul to replace the previous consul who had recently died of natural causes. Yet the peak of Agricola's career was just approaching, for in 77 AD, Vespasian decided to appoint him as Britain's next governor, probably inspired by Agricola's loyalty to his regime, as well as his extensive experience in the region. Agricola arrived relatively late in the year, when the traditional summer campaigning season had already passed. As a result, the Roman troops in Britain had grown relaxed and distracted, assuming that no further operations would take place for the rest of the year. This lax attitude was quickly noticed by Rome's enemies, who sought to exploit this moment of vulnerability by raiding the frontiers, while within the province itself, the Ordivices tribe rebelled and nearly wiped out a unit of auxiliary cavalry stationed in their territory. As his first task as governor, Agricola restored the army's discipline and then moved to check these new threats to Roman Britain, starting with the Ordivices. Agricola assembled an ad hoc army composed of legionaries on detached service from their units across the province, along with the small force of auxiliaries he was able to gather to his side quickly. This hastily gathered army might seem a very poor force to lead against an entire tribe. However, Agricola probably wanted to crush the Ordivices rebellion as quickly as possible in order to discourage any further uprisings, and thus was forced to resort to using whatever troops were immediately available to him. In this case, he was following standard Roman doctrine for suppressing revolts by bringing as large a concentration of force as possible to bear on the rebels as quickly as he could. Agricola's army was sufficiently formidable to discourage the Ordivices tribe from facing him in open battle on the plains, and they instead stuck to the hills around the tribe's territory. Undeterred, Agricola led his troops into the difficult ground, with Tacitus claiming he personally led the army from the front ranks. Unfortunately, we have no details about the fighting that took place, aside from the fact that the Romans won an overwhelming victory and decimated the Ordivices army. It is likely that they had not expected the Romans to venture into the rough terrain, and so may have been caught completely by surprise by Agricola's assault. Next, the Romans set their sights on the island of Mona, which had once again become a stronghold for Britons resisting imperial rule. This operation was again conceived hastily, and unlike Paulinus before him, Agricola did not have a fleet with which to transport his army to the island. However, his auxiliaries did include cavalrymen who were accustomed to swimming in shallow waters with their horses and full kit, and it would be these troopers upon whom Agricola would primarily rely to retake Mona. The cavalry found a suitable location to ford over to the island, which succeeded in catching the Britons completely off guard. In the end, no fighting was necessary, as the shocked Britons opted to negotiate with Agricola, surrendering Mona to Rome without bloodshed. These two victories cemented Agricola's reputation across the province as an effective governor, as he had surprised everyone by immediately rushing into action. Agricola also made further efforts to try to prevent future discontent against Roman rule. First, by reorganizing the distribution of grain and the collection of taxes across the province, and also by an overhaul of the provincial administration, whose poor performance and discipline Agricola blamed for the recent rebellion. In the summer of 78 AD, Agricola began his famous string of campaigns that would lead him further and further north towards what is roughly today Scotland, known at the time as Caledonia. It was also probably around this time that Agricola assembled the field army he would use in his northern campaigns, likely totaling around 20,000 men. There does not appear to have been any serious fighting during the first campaign season, with the Romans largely focused on launching raids against hostile Briton communities. Agricola quickly became popular among his troops, and he was personally involved with scouting ahead of the march column, selecting the sites for camps, and was quick to praise and reward good discipline and deeds as swiftly as he punished any lackluster performance. The winter months were spent building new forts to consolidate Roman territory and improving relations between Rome and the Britons within their province, in which Agricola was reportedly so successful that it led to a wave of provincials eagerly adopting Roman customs. In 79 AD, Agricola led his army into contact with peoples who had yet to be encountered by Rome. Again, our sources are unfortunately very light on details, but it is likely that these new foes were mainly composed of the Dunoni, whose territory Agricola raided up to the river Tay. At this point, the governor decided to pause his advance, and the entire next year was instead spent securing the new gains made over the past months before resuming the advance in early 81 AD. This time, Agricola struck into the region known today as Galloway, probably aiming to secure the vulnerable western flank of the territory he had recently gained. Here, the Romans encountered the tribe known as the Novantae, and for the first time appear to have faced serious resistance, as Agricola was forced to win several battles while securing this area. The governor then brought his army up to the shoreline facing Ireland and is said to have contemplated launching an invasion of the island. According to Tacitus, Agricola believed, probably over-optimistically, that the entirety of Ireland could have been secured with just a single legion and a sufficient force of auxiliaries, and that he foresaw it acting as an ideal military base for Rome, from which the rest of Britain could easily be policed. Regardless of whether or not he had such lofty goals, however, Agricola had more pressing matters to attend to in the north, and so the Roman advance continued in 82 AD. Agricola began the year by building new forts and consolidating fresh gains around the Forth, after which the Romans kept pushing north. During this phase of the campaign, Agricola is said to have made extensive use of the Roman navy to support his ground forces, using the fleet to secure many towns along the coastline. Tacitus also notes that a friendly rivalry soon developed between the Roman army and the Marines serving aboard the fleet, with the two forces often camping together and comparing their past achievements. The Caledonians now began to step up their attacks on the Romans, harassing many of their forts and beginning to muster in larger numbers. Some of Agricola's more cautious officers urged him to withdraw back to the line along the Forth, rather than risking moving even deeper into unfamiliar, hostile territory, but the confident general dismissed their concerns. Agricola then divided his army into 3 separate columns, likely in order to ease his army's logistical burdens. However, this was quickly noted by the Caledonians, who began probing the Roman army for a weak point to isolate and overwhelm. They determined that the column containing the famous 9th Legion Hispania was the most ideal target, and the Caledonian warriors launched a devastating nighttime assault on the 9th's camp. For a time, the situation appeared dire for the surprised legionaries, as the sentries on the camp walls were quickly overrun and the defenses breached, leading to a chaotic melee inside the camp. Fortunately for the 9th, Agricola's scouts soon learned of the debacle and informed the general, who promptly gathered a relief force to aid his beleaguered troops. The Caledonian ambush now paradoxically ended up working against the attackers, as the men of the 9th stubbornly held out throughout the night, which led to the Caledonians becoming trapped between them and Agricola's relief army in the morning. The Caledonians now began to panic as their situation grew more desperate and their army began to rout. The 9th seized upon the opportunity to counterattack, pushing the enemy all the way back to the camp gates, where fierce fighting continued for some time. However, eventually, the pressure on the Caledonians grew too great, and their survivors broke and fled into the surrounding woods and marshes after suffering heavy casualties. This victory emboldened the Roman troops even further, with even more cautious members of Agricola's command now appearing even more confident about a successful push further north. With victory fresh on their minds, Agricola and the Roman army marched ever deeper into Caledonia. Stay tuned for our next episode as we follow the ambitious campaigns of the legions into the frozen north. Consider supporting the channel by joining our Patreon, where you can catch script previews, participate in polls, and grab HD downloads of all our art. A big thanks to the current patrons for funding the channel, and to the researchers, writers, and artists for making this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team and this community. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related videos. See you in the next one.